So, what is news verification?
News verification is almost like the science of investigating whether a news story is true or false. That's the basic beginnings of it. But there are so many steps in verifying whether or not we have reliable information. So at its very basic level, news verification is just finding out what is the truth, but there are many steps to actually decide whether or not the journalist has got information that is true, that is trustworthy, that is reliable information, so that people can actually decide what is really going on here, so that they actually know what is actually happening in a situation. But that's a very broad introduction to something that has many other steps in between.
What is your background in verification?
Well, as a journalist, I've been in journalism for, gosh, nearly 20 years. And when I started, it was a matter of you would speak to people face to face, you would have a story, and you would go and interview people on various sides of the story, and you would get that face to face conversation so that you can really see them, and then you would perhaps see them at their job, at their work, and you might ask for some documentation. That's how it started. But now, of course, we have online media, we have social media, and so news verification, I think, has really gone to a much more important degree, a much more difficult degree, really. There's so much more work to be done. But it's also much more open now as well, and I think that's a good thing for us. So with online media and social media, there's potentially a lot of other tricks and things that people can use, and ways they can fake news stories and that can go viral. But I'm also finding now, especially since being at the University of Hong Kong here for the last 3 years, that actually we can use everything we've got online and with social media, and we can use that technology to verify the information. So there's many different ways of doing it. So if you're looking at what someone's posting on Facebook or on Twitter, you'll look at the person's profile. Who's posting this? Are they an activist? Do they have some sort of other agenda? How do you find out? Well, you look at their profile. What else have they been posting? How long have they even been on Facebook or Twitter under this name? Sometimes they just set up a quick name, a quick profile to get on the bandwagon and talk about some trending issue or political event. And you look at what other links they have. Who else is talking to this person? Then, of course, we use other tools like reverse image search with Google, so you can see if a picture is really what people are saying it is, or if it's come from another context completely. So sometimes it's a context like from a movie, and people are trying to say, oh, this is the latest weather, but actually it's not. Anything that is topical, people, for whatever reasons, try to make up stories and fake stories. So we even saw recently with the Samsung 7s that were exploding on Weibo and on Facebook. There were photos that I debunked recently because people will say, oh, this is a Samsung factory that's on fire in mainland China and my relatives are inside it now. And I did a quick reverse image search, and actually, yes, it was a fire with that building, but it happened 6 months earlier in Africa. So it's something I'm constantly looking at and going through these steps of verification. And I mentioned earlier that verification is attempting to get to the truth, and that's just the very big umbrella terminology, I guess, that you can use. But there's so many steps in between, and you've got to look at things like, if there's a report, what are the sources that someone is using? So who is the journalist speaking to and interviewing? And do the different sources corroborate each other? They might not necessarily be from the same side even, but can you piece together that, yeah, I'm seeing the same story, or this would this interrelates and the pieces of the puzzle are fitting in together here. We also corroborate because you might try and collect sources that are actual eyewitnesses to the event, so they've seen for themselves, or they might be an expert who really knows this topic really well and can speak about it, versus someone who might be authorized to talk about it, but just because they're authorized, that means they have permission, but doesn't mean they actually have the inside information. They don't have the expertise or knowledge. So we have to look at all of this, and are those sources willing to be named and put their name to what they're saying? Because it's very easy for people to say something and remain anonymous, because then they're not held responsible or accountable for what they're saying. So the journalist has to think about all of these aspects in verification.
You mentioned earlier that you've been working here for 3 years, so I assume that you must have been aware of the Hong Kong Verify, the tools that students at HKU used to verify news stories during the Occupy movement. So can you share with us a bit of your knowledge about that tool?
Okay, yes, well, with the live verified page, that received over 100,000 likes within the first 2 days that it was set up by students. And basically that was because one of the students had a WhatsApp message that popped up on her WhatsApp feed, and it was a photo of tanks in the tunnel at Tsim Sha Tsui, the Cross Harbour Tunnel. And the message was basically that the tanks are coming from mainland China, and it's trying to tell everyone, be careful because it's going to be like the next Tiananmen Square. And it really incited a lot of fear in people, and this was being spread through WhatsApp groups, and then people were spreading it further. So what Gloria did was she had a look at this, and you can do a quick reverse image search on Google, and you'll see that that photo is at least 4 years old, possibly even older. So someone has got an old picture and they've uploaded. So that's, technology-wise, that's just a simple reverse image search, and you load that up and you see where else it's come from. Now, as well as using those online tools, you go to the spot, you do your own field work, and you see, well, what is actually happening? I'm down here in Central, it doesn't look like there are any tanks coming through. And also you do a few other steps as well in the meantime as you're trying to get there. You message back the person who sent you this WhatsApp and you say, where did you get this picture from? Who sent it to you? Where else have you seen this picture? Who else is seeing this picture? And you try to build a story of what's going on and how did this picture come about. And quite quickly you'll see that it hasn't come from anywhere in authority. It hasn't come from anyone that is a current eyewitness to that. So, and also another important feature, I think, for their Facebook platform was that it was also very collaborative with the public. So it was inviting, it was open to the public to upload using a Google Doc their suggestions, what they've heard, what they've seen, and then the editors in the student newsroom would have a look at that, and they would decide whether they think it's worth following up on, and then they would decide how they would follow up as well. So I think it was quite a good idea to involve the public that way. So they're getting informed by the public, and then they're showing the public what they're doing, how they're going out and verifying or debunking the stories.
You also brought up Google in your previous answer, and I learned from my teammate Samantha Stanley that you've been working with Google on a project called Check. And I'm just curious to know whether or not you could share with us a bit of information about that project and its potential impact on news verification.
Okay, it's similar to what the students were doing in a way. So Check is a part of a company called Medan that came out of a Google News Lab. So one of the first Google News Labs. Now the Check platform is actually used by the best in the business. You've got people like Bellingcat that have been debunking or they've been following and finding Russian book missiles that they have verified to be responsible for the shooting down of a civilian aircraft over Ukraine. And they've pieced together using not only Google maps, and so not in this case it's not a reverse image search, but basically they're looking at location maps, and they're basically piecing together where there have been photos uploaded on social media and other photos. Then they look at the Google Maps and they look at the landscape and they make sure that yes, this matches this, and painstakingly have pieced it together. So you've got the best in the business doing this. But the thing is, again, this can be open to the public for them to suggest or give. They can work on a project. It can be collaborative. You can work in groups, and everyone uploads and pieces together in a project the information that they're finding. So you're working together, and the idea of it is that it's open. So you're making open the steps in the process of verifying something. It is open for the public to see. And you can upload it in real time if you like, and have like a blog that's showing these steps, or you can work on your project later and have all your steps and upload it later onto a website. So the idea is that the public can see you've checked this data, this photo, these documents, and you are showing and you're being open and transparent about everything that you're doing. And you have the knowledge of the masses that way. Everyone is collecting information, and you have a team leader that can ask people to look into particular different focuses and different events. But you have to make sure that you've got a solid team and you've got a solid group there that are working together. So even the team leader has to be careful at the start and make sure they validate and verify who's working on their team. Now, of course, here at Hong Kong U, I'm doing that with, I've built it into the curriculum. So I'm doing it with students, and I've got a research assistant, and we're doing that together and verifying and debunking a lot of different subjects. And the whole idea of this is so that we see so much information that goes viral and so much misinformation. Sometimes it's silly things, sometimes it's potentially really important. And the whole idea and the greater aim, and it might sound a bit idealistic, but the greater aim is so that we can get the corrections and the verifications to also one day go viral. So you'll have things that'll go viral and they'll get 100,000 hits, and then you'll look and you'll see the correction or the verification might only get 10,000. But that's better than nothing, and our aim is to try to educate the digital public about the importance of also trying to click and share and get excited when they see, oh, this has been corrected, I'm going to share this, so that my friends stop uploading and stop sharing this wrong information, or potentially don't share it if they haven't come across it yet, but then they do in the future. And we all try to work together as a responsible digital community.
You use the word misinformation. What are the differences between misinformation and disinformation?
Oh, I think basically misinformation, disinformation, I use those interchangeably, to be honest. It's just sometimes you'll have something that is a downright fake because it's been invented to be a fake. And I guess that's sort of the stronger, the worst end of the spectrum, if you like. But the misinformation can also include things just being misinterpreted. So you look at facts. So it's not just about putting perhaps a photo in the right context and showing, oh yeah, that was a fake. Sometimes misinformation could be, say, political facts or things that aren't quoted correctly. And it's putting even survey results into a better perspective. We have different surveys and research that goes around saying, eating bacon is bad for you and increases your risk of cancer, and reports were saying increases your risk of cancer 18%. But that's misinformation because journalists weren't looking at the details, they weren't looking at the statistics. And yes, your risk increased by 18%, but it doesn't mean you have an 18% greater chance of developing cancer if you eat a certain amount of bacon. It means that your baseline risk goes up by 18%. So you have a baseline risk to begin with of 4 point something, increase that by 18%, and really it only jumps it up to, say, about 5%. This is based on a US citizen. And that's where you're looking at figures of 4 or 5% versus an 18 times greater risk of getting cancer, particular cancer, from eating or consuming a food product. And that's misinformation if people aren't interpreting that correctly, if they're not looking at the results. One of my bugbears that goes around the internet and around Facebook is that drinking 3 glasses of champagne a day is good for your health. And they've completely not looked at the data and the research where that came from. It came from research that was first done on rats, and humans are very different to rats. And the misinformation that went around said that it was 3 glasses of champagne a day, when actually the report said, I think it was something like 3 per week. So that was incorrect, and even the correlation wasn't really correct because it was a small study and it was on rats, and it was just blown out of proportion. And I still see that coming up in my Facebook feed. And I think every now and then I think, oh, I've got to do more to make that go viral, that correction go viral.
You touched upon this question previously, but I would like to ask you again. What are the consequences of not knowing how to verify news?
Oh, it can be quite serious. And the thing is, some people think, oh, well, what does it matter if you've got this thing going around about champagne? But it's how we're thinking, and one thing can lead to another. The consequences can be simply that people will make a poor decision about perhaps what food they eat. Other consequences can be far more serious, and you'll have racial hatred will be incited. You'll have people that are completely misinformed about perhaps who to vote for, or you'll have riots that will be incited because incorrect information has been spread and spread and spread throughout social media, and people just see it, they don't think about it, they believe it, and they'll believe everything from, recently I saw people are believing things that Obama was really born in Kenya, and they won't think about it, or that Hillary Clinton has asked people to go and protest, and they haven't thought about it, and they haven't looked into it. Just 1 or 2 quick steps. I always say to my students, 7-second delay before you send anything. Stop and think about it. And also another thing is to read through an entire article before you send it, and you have to discipline yourself. And even now I see something and I get the gist of it in the first couple of paragraphs. I think, oh yeah, I'll send that. No, I'm going to read through the whole lot, because sometimes you'll get 3/4 of the way through an article and you'll think, I really don't agree with that, or that would give the wrong impression of me if I send that. And so you need to read the whole thing, and then you might still send it, but you might say, I really liked this, but I don't agree with that. What do you think? And you can put it out there that way. So there's a real responsibility, and like I said, it can come on a spectrum where it can be something about just informing ourselves about food, general lifestyle, but the whole idea is that we're a knowledge society. The more knowledge we have, the better off we are, and the better off we can make society in the future. And the more we can try to avoid potential clashes that really do happen when people spread false news on social media and incite violence, basically.
So you told your students to have a 7-second delay button before disseminating news. They're not sure whether or not it is true or not.
Yes.
What other verification tools that you would recommend to your students, or to yourself even?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was interesting because I spoke to the Asia editor of Storeful, and I said, what else can we do? And I told him what we were doing, and he said, oh, that's about 90% of what we do. So it's basically simple things that don't take long. Number one is just be a little bit skeptical about life. Have this lens where I'm not going to believe everything I see. Okay, so think that way to begin with. And then number 2 is, if there's a photo or a video, do that reverse image search on Google. Quite easy, and you'll be surprised at the results that you find. If it's a video, sometimes you've got to look a little closer at the detail. Be observant, and is there something that doesn't quite add up? It's interesting. The more observant you are, the more you notice, and the more skeptical you get. And the other thing too with social media is really think about the networks. Who has posted this? You can get a lot of information from their profile, and you get a lot of information by going back and looking at what other things have they been posting? What other things, who else have they been speaking to online? What other groups? And the thing is, they might have great intentions, they might even be a good charitable group, and that's fine, but you still have to realize that they're always going to give their side of the story. So you've always got to think, there could be something else here for us to look into. There could be something else for us to consider. Try to think and be educated about, and it's quite easy for us here because our students study statistics and data journalism here is on offer. But think about things like, how does a poll work? How do surveys work? And when you're looking at the data, have a look and go, well, was that a very big survey size? And if that information's not there, be very skeptical and really don't rely on that, because if the information is not there or if it's not easy to find, there's probably a reason for it. It's probably not that good. But quite often, even if I do think a survey seems quite reliable, I'll still click into that and I'll look and I'll see, oh, can I find the original data, the original research that's gone into it and the report, especially if it's something that's important. The other thing too is to look at what sources the journalist or whoever is uploading the information is quoting and using. So it's a little bit like where you look at the profile of, say, someone's Twitter profile or Facebook profile. Have a look at who's being quoted here. Am I just getting one side of a story here? And who is this person? Do they have a business interest that they're trying to push? Do they have a political or propaganda interest that they're trying to push, and therefore they wouldn't want the whole open scenario to be known to everyone? So you think through those steps and you look at the sources. Are they named? Who do they belong to? And basically you put the whole thing together. So you do this big investigative piece. It sounds like a lot. And look, real journalism is hard work. Good journalism is hard work. But I think even in the everyday as general consumers, if you're aware that they are all the steps that need to be taken care of, and you need to have this critical lens thinking about this, then I think that's enough. And that's a good start, that you're thinking that way. And you might just hesitate that bit more before you share and before you send. And you might just care a little bit more. And you might also just do a little bit more to try to share the good information, the verified information, once you see a correction as well. So I think it sounds like a lot of steps, but it's more, it's also a state of mind as well, that you sort of think, I'm just going to wait and maybe I'll look into a few other things when I've got a bit more time. And then sure enough, you'll find that, yeah, I'm quite glad I didn't touch that story, because there's more to it.
Speaking of propaganda, one-sided story, would you mind sharing with me your opinions on the two stories that I shared with you via email?
Yeah, well, I think that is, and I mean, I don't know those stories closely, so I haven't done my own, analysis on them. But having a look at that, I think that is a prime example of when people just look at what's on Facebook or on social media and believe and get all hyped up and don't sort of stop and think what is really going on here. And then it's like that propaganda that rallies the masses, and then we see terrible things. So that's the serious end of the spectrum that I was talking about. It can incite violence, racial hatred, and people to act. And I think the sad thing is that the people, once they realize what's going on, would have real regrets that they were a part of something when they didn't have the whole piece of information, and they've basically just been used to help push and promote someone else's agenda. So that's the importance of us being very careful to see, well, what are we getting on our social media feed? Who are we getting from this? And just stop and think, is this really the full story of what's happening? And where else can we look? Is there any other information? Now, the problem is, in a lot of places and in a lot of countries, you can't get more information because you're only getting so much. So you have to still, I think, delay and be very careful if there's a call to arms and for people to be involved in violence of any kind, or and we need to think also to research and to look a little wider and to look at news sources and information sources that might be a bit different to what we would normally just stumble upon in our feed. We've got to make a conscious effort to look elsewhere for the information.
Are you able to tell me the differences between media literacy and news literacy?
I think news literacy is a specialization within media literacy. That's how I like to think of it. So I think news literacy really focuses on everything that I've said about, really focusing on what is the news information message and can we use this to help society. So news literacy is talking about what is news, what is independent, verifiable news, and are people being transparent in delivering this to you. It is different to the broad range and the other areas within media literacy that would look at the media messages that we're receiving, and it could be through, say, entertainment channels, and we get different messages about society through, what's in a movie, for instance. But news is focusing very much on that, what I call good journalism, and it's focusing on what's the message that we're getting there, and how much are we striving to get to the truth.
Last question. Why is news verification so important?
I think news verification is important because we're not robots, we're human beings, and we need to improve our society and leave society better than when we found it. And we are all so connected now as global digital citizens, and we can disseminate information and share information so fast, and we have this constant flow. And for us to make sure that we're doing this in an intelligent way that should reflect who we are as human species and should give us that dignity, I think this is where news verification is important, to reflect upon that and reflect upon these values of giving information so that society can be strong and can be civilized and can be supportive of one another rather than the opposite.
Thank you so much for this interview.
My pleasure.
Yeah.